The metal floor was cold beneath Daquan's feet as he walked back to his cell. 3 years. 3 years since the Velmari had won the war. 3 years since he had seen Earth's sky. The corridor lights flickered above him, casting shadows that danced along the gray walls of the prison station. He moved past other cells. Inside them, other humans sat on their bunks, staring at nothing. Some were sleeping. Others just waited. Waiting was what they did now. Waiting for food. Waiting for work shifts. Waiting for a future that might never come. They reached his cell and stepped inside. The door slid shut behind him with a soft hiss. The room was small. A bunk, a sink, a toilet, nothing else. He had lived in this box for 3 years, and he knew every scratch on the walls. He sat on his bunk and closed his eyes. This was his time, the only time that belonged to him. The guards didn't care what prisoners did after work shifts, as long as they stayed quiet. So Day did what he did every night. He went somewhere else. In his mind, he built a place. A sanctuary. He started with his apartment in Seoul, the small living room where his sister Hana used to sit by the window. She loved watching the rain. He could see her there now, in his memory, smiling as water dropped down the glass. Her voice came back to him, soft and warm. He moved through the memory carefully, like walking through a museum. Every detail mattered. The smell of his mother's cooking from the kitchen. The sound of traffic outside. The way sunlight came through the curtains in the morning. He held each piece gently, examined it, and placed it in his mental palace. This was how he survived. Other prisoners drank the station's cheap alcohol. Others fought. Others just gave up. But Day built his sanctuary, one memory at a time. The Velmari had taken his freedom. They had taken Earth. They had taken Hana, who died when the bombs fell on Bizon. But they couldn't take his mind. That was still his dot. He was deep in his meditation when he heard the door slide open. Day's eyes snapped open. It was late. Past curfew. Guards didn't check cells at this hour unless something was wrong. He looked toward the door and saw her standing there. She was Velmari. He recognized her face. He had seen her before in the engineering bay, watching the prisoners work. She was young for an officer, with the smooth features and large eyes that all Velmari had. Their skin had a slight blue tint under certain lights. Their movements were graceful, almost floating. She wore the dark uniform of a scout officer. Her name tag said Lixus. She stood in the doorway, not moving, just watching him. Day didn't stand up. He didn't speak. He just looked back at her, waiting. Prisoners learned quickly not to make sudden moves around Velmari. They were telepaths. They could sense emotions. Fear made them suspicious. Anger made them violent. So Day kept his breathing steady. He kept his face calm. He waited. Lixus stepped into the cell. The door remained open behind her. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. Then Day felt it. A pressure in his mind. Not painful, but present. Like someone standing too close. She was reading him. The Velmari did this. They reached into minds and felt what was there. They sensed emotions like humans sensed heat from fire. It was how they maintained order. A prisoner planning escape would feel different. A prisoner hiding something would radiate guilt. The Velmari could feel it all. Day let her look. He had nothing to hide. He sat on his bunk, hands resting on his knees, and let her telepathic sense wash over him. He didn't try to block her. He didn't try to hide. He simply was, and then something changed. Lixus froze. Her large eyes went wide. Her mouth opened slightly. The graceful confidence that all Velmari officers carried vanished in an instant. She stood completely still, like someone had pressed pause on her existence. They watched her face change. confusion, then shock, then something else, something that looked almost like fear. She stumbled backward. One step, then another. Her hand reached out to steady herself against the wall. Her breathing quickened. She was staring at him like he was something impossible, something that shouldn't exist. They knew what had happened. She had gone deeper than she expected. She hadn't just sensed his surface emotions. She had seen his sanctuary. She had seen the carefully constructed palace he built every night in his mind. She had seen his memories, organized and preserved. She had seen his pain, acknowledged and carried with purpose. Velmari thought humans were chaotic. They thought human minds were primitive, loud, messy. They assumed humans were barely better than animals, acting on instinct and emotion without control. But Day's mind wasn't chaos. It was architecture. It was art. It was choice. He could see her processing this. See her trying to understand what she had felt. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the distant hum of the station's life support systems. Then Day spoke. His voice was quiet, but steady. "You're in my head, aren't you?" Lixis flinched like he had struck her. She pulled her telepathic sense back so fast that Day felt the absence. The pressure in his mind vanished. She stood against the wall, breathing hard, staring at him with those wide eyes. Day didn't move, didn't threaten, didn't demand. He just looked at her with the same calm expression he had worn when she entered. "It's okay," he said softly. "I understand. You were curious. You wanted to see what a human mind looks like." Lixis shook her head. Not a denial, a rejection of what she had experienced. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she turned and fled. She moved out of his cell so quickly that her footsteps barely made a sound. The door slid shut behind her with a hiss. Day sat alone in his cell again. The silence returned. He took a slow breath and let it out. His hands were steady. His heart rate was normal. He felt the same as he always did, calm, controlled, purposeful. But something had changed. He could feel it. That Velmari officer had seen something she wasn't supposed to see. She had looked into his mind, expecting to find a prisoner, a defeated human, a broken survivor of a lost war. Instead, she had found something that challenged everything her people believed. Day lay back on his bunk and closed his eyes. He returned to his sanctuary, to his sister's smile, to the rain on the window, to the life he had built inside himself where no one could take it away. Tomorrow, the work shifts would continue. The guards would still watch. The war would still be lost. But tonight, one Velmari had seen the truth. And Day suspected the truth would not let her go. He didn't know what would come next. But for the first time in 3 years, something had changed. And change, even small change, was hope. Lixis couldn't sleep. She lay in her quarters, staring at the ceiling, and all she could see was that human's mind. That impossible, beautiful, terrifying mind. She had read humans before. All Velmari officers had. It was part of their training. When you could sense emotions, you learned to recognize threats. Human prisoners were supposed to feel one of 3 ways: fear, anger, or emptiness. Those were the patterns. Those were what made sense. But Day Quan didn't fit any pattern. When she had reached into his thoughts, she expected chaos. She expected the raw emotional noise that humans always carried. Instead, she found order, structure, a mental palace built with such care that it made her own thoughts feel scattered by comparison. She had seen his memories. His sister laughing, rain falling on windows, mathematical equations that flowed like music, and underneath it all, pain, deep, terrible pain, the kind that should break a person. But he hadn't broken. He had taken that pain and built something beautiful with it. The Valmari didn't do that. They couldn't. When one Valmari felt pain, they all felt it through their telepathic connection. Suffering was shared, distributed across their collective consciousness. It was how they had achieved peace centuries ago. No one could hurt others when they felt that hurt themselves. But humans were alone. Each human carried their own pain, with no one to share the weight. And somehow, this human had learned to carry his pain with grace, with purpose, with choice. Lixis sat up in her bunk. Her quarters were larger than the prisoner cells, but not by much. Space on the station was limited. She walked to her desk and pulled up her data pad. She needed to understand. She needed to know if what she had seen was real or some kind of trick. She accessed the prisoner files. Daquan, age 28, former engineer. Captured during the Battle of New Singapore 3 years ago. No disciplinary incidents. No escape attempts. Model prisoner. The file said nothing about his mind. Nothing about the sanctuary he had built. Of course it didn't. The guards didn't care about what happened in prisoners' heads, as long as they worked and didn't cause trouble. Lixis read further. Family status. One sister, deceased, killed during the bombardment of Bizan. Mother and father. Status unknown. Likely dead. She closed her eyes and felt a strange sensation. Guilt. She had never felt guilty about the war before. The Valmari Empire had brought order to the galaxy. Humans had resisted, so they had been defeated. It was simple, logical. But now she knew what that defeat cost. She had seen it in Day's mind. She had felt the hole where his sister used to be. And she had seen how he chose to honor that loss instead of being destroyed by it. The days that followed were difficult. Lixis tried to focus on her duties. She conducted inspections. She filed reports. She maintained the routine that kept the station running. But her mind kept returning to that cell, to those calm eyes, to that impossible mental sanctuary. She started watching him during work shifts. Not obviously, just observing. The engineering bay was large, filled with machinery that kept the mining operations running. Human prisoners maintained the equipment under Valmari supervision. It was simple work, but necessary. They worked quietly. He didn't talk much. But Lixis noticed things. Small things. The way he helped younger prisoners when they struggled with repairs. The way he shared his water ration with an older human who looked exhausted. The way he kept his area clean and organized, even though no one enforced that rule. He maintained discipline, not because anyone forced him, but because he chose to. There was another prisoner who stayed close to Day, an older man named Te Haiyan. He had been a soldier before the war ended. His file listed multiple disciplinary incidents: fighting, insubordination, theft of supplies. But around Day, he was calmer. They spoke sometimes in low voices during breaks. Lixis couldn't hear what they said, but she could sense the connection. Trust, friendship. Humans built these bonds. The Valmari had their telepathic connection, which created instant understanding. But humans had to work for their connections. They had to choose each other. And somehow, that made their bonds stronger. 1 week after the incident in the cell, Commander Thex summoned Lixis to his office. She stood at attention while he reviewed something on his datapad. Thex was older, experienced. He had served in the war and now ran this station with efficient precision. "You've been spending time observing the human prisoners," Thex said without looking up. Specifically prisoner Daquan. Lixis kept her expression neutral. "I conduct regular inspections, Commander. It's part of my duties. Inspections don't require standing in the engineering bay for extended periods." Now Thex looked at her. His eyes were sharp. Is there a problem with this prisoner? No, Commander. Then why the interest? Lixus hesitated. She couldn't tell him the truth. Couldn't explain what she had seen in Day's mind. It would sound foolish. Impossible. So she said the safest thing she could think of. I'm trying to understand them. The humans. We defeated them, but I want to know why they fought so long. Why they resisted when resistance was clearly futile. Dex leaned back in his chair. They're primitive. Their minds are chaotic. They act on emotion rather than logic. That's why they fought. That's why they lost. But they fought for 12 years, Lixus said carefully. They held multiple systems. They developed weapons that challenged our fleet. How did primitives do that? Dex's expression hardened. Are you questioning the Empire's assessment? No, Commander. I'm questioning my own understanding. I want to serve better. To do that, I need to understand our enemies. It was the right thing to say. Dex's expression softened slightly. He nodded. Curiosity is acceptable, as long as it doesn't interfere with duty. But be careful, Scout Officer. Humans are dangerous precisely because they're unpredictable. They don't share thoughts like we do. Each one is isolated, trapped in their own mind. That isolation makes them capable of deception, of violence, of actions we would never consider. Lixus thought about Day's sanctuary, his careful preservation of memories, his choice to carry pain with grace. None of that felt unpredictable. It felt intentional, purposeful. I understand, Commander, she said, dismissed. Lixus left the office and returned to her quarters. She sat at her desk and pulled up more files. War records, battle reports, human military tactics. She read for hours, searching for understanding. The records showed human forces fighting with determination that bordered on suicide. They defended positions long after logic demanded retreat. They launched attacks against superior forces. They refused surrender even when defeat was certain. The Velmari interpreted this as primitive aggression, emotional instability, inability to calculate odds properly. But what if it was something else? What if it was choice? What if humans fought so hard because they chose to, not because they couldn't help themselves? Late that night, Lixus made a decision. She needed to understand. And to understand, she needed to talk to him. Really talk. Not as a guard and prisoner, but as one thinking being to another. She checked the duty roster. Her next shift wouldn't start for 10 hours. The night patrols wouldn't notice if she visited the prisoner block. She had clearance. She had authority. And she had questions that wouldn't let her rest. Lixus stood and walked to the door. Her heart beat faster than usual. She was nervous. That was strange. Velmari officers didn't get nervous about talking to prisoners. But this wasn't normal. Nothing about this was normal. She left her quarters and headed toward the prisoner block. The corridors were quiet. Most of the station slept during night cycle. Only essential personnel remained on duty. She reached the prisoner block and used her security code to enter. The cells stretched out in rows. Behind each door, a human slept or sat awake, trapped in their isolation. Lixus walked to cell 47. Dai Quan cell. She stood outside the door for a long moment, considering. She could still walk away. Still pretend nothing had happened. Still believe what she had been taught about humans. But she had seen his mind. And that changed everything. She opened the door. Day was awake when the door opened. He sat on his bunk in the darkness, eyes open, breathing slow. He had learned to sleep lightly in prison. Any sound could mean danger. But when he saw Lixus standing in his doorway again, he wasn't surprised. He had expected her to return. You came back, he said quietly. Lixus stepped inside. The door closed behind her. She stood there in the darkness, her Velmari eyes catching the faint light from the corridor better than his could. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I need to understand," she finally said. Her voice was soft, almost uncertain. "What I saw in your mind. I need to know if it was real." Day gestured to the small space beside him on the bunk. "You can sit, if you want." She hesitated, then moved forward and sat on the edge of the bunk, maintaining careful distance. Proper protocol. A Velmari officer sitting with a human prisoner. This violated numerous regulations. But she sat anyway. "It was real," they said. "What you saw. That's what I do every night. I build a sanctuary in my mind, a place where I keep the things that matter." "How?" The question came out almost desperate. "How do you create that kind of order? Human minds aren't supposed to be like that. You're supposed to be chaotic, emotional, primitive." Day was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I ask you something? When you feel pain, what happens?" "I feel it," Lixis said. "But so does everyone else connected to me. My pain becomes shared pain. The collective helps carry it. And that brings peace. Because no one wants to cause pain when they know they'll feel it too." "Yes, exactly." Day nodded. "Humans don't have that. When I hurt, only I feel it. When my sister died, only I carried that loss. No one else felt her absence the way I did. I was alone with it." Lixis looked at him. In the darkness, she could barely see his face, but she could sense his emotions. Sadness, but controlled, purposeful. "That sounds terrible," she said. "It is," they agreed. "It's the hardest thing about being human. We're isolated. Each of us is trapped in our own head with our own pain. But that isolation also means something important. It means we have to choose. Choose what? Everything. How we respond to pain. How we treat others. Whether we become bitter or whether we grow. The Velmari share emotion, so kindness is natural. You feel what others feel, so helping them helps you. But humans don't have that built-in connection. When I help someone, I don't automatically feel their relief. I have to choose to care. I have to choose to be kind even when it doesn't benefit me directly." Lixis processed this. "So when you helped that young prisoner in the engineering bay yesterday, when you shared your water with the older man, you gained nothing from that. I gained the knowledge that I chose to be who I want to be. That's not nothing. But it's harder. So much harder than how we do it." "Yes," they said simply. "It's harder. But it's ours. Our choice. Our humanity." Lixis sat in silence, thinking. Then she said, "Tell me about your sanctuary. How you built it." Day leaned back against the wall. "After I was captured, I spent the first few months angry, bitter. I hated the Velmari. I hated this prison. I hated that my sister was dead and I was alive. That anger was eating me from the inside. I could feel myself becoming someone I didn't want to be. What changed? I remembered something Hannah taught me. My sister. She loved origami. Paper folding. She said it was about taking something simple and creating something beautiful through careful, deliberate folds. Each fold mattered. Each choice shaped the final result. I don't understand the connection. I realized my mind was like paper. I could let it crumple into chaos, or I could fold it into something purposeful. So I started practicing. Every night, I would choose one memory. I would examine every detail. The sights, sounds, smells, emotions. Then I would place it carefully in my mental palace. Like an origami fold. But some memories hurt. The ones of your sister. Yes, those hurt the most. But I fold those too. Because love is worth the pain. Hannah existed. She laughed. She taught me things. She was real and important and beautiful. If I let go of the pain, I let go of her. So I carry both, the love and the loss, together. Lixis felt something shift inside her, a concept clicking into place. You choose to carry your pain because the alternative is forgetting. Exactly. We would never do that. The Valmari. We would share that pain across the collective until it became manageable, until it became small enough to ignore. And you achieve peace that way. But you also lose something. You lose the sharp edges of feeling, the intensity of individual experience. Lixis thought about this. She thought about her own life, connected always to other Vilmari, never truly alone, never truly individual, always part of the collective consciousness. It brought comfort, stability, peace, but it also meant she had never really chosen anything. Her thoughts were influenced by thousands of others. Her emotions were modulated by the collective. Even her presence here, sitting in this cell, felt like the first truly independent decision she had ever made. Does it get easier? She asked. Carrying the pain? No, but you get stronger. You learn to carry it better. And you find reasons to keep carrying it. People worth protecting. Memories worth preserving. A future worth building. They talked through the night. Lixis asked about Earth, and Day described cities she had never seen. Sol with its mountains and rivers. Bizin with its beaches. The forests of the north. The farms of the south. He painted pictures with words, and she listened like a child hearing stories. She told him about the Velmari homeworld, about cities built through collective thought, about art created by hundreds of minds working as one, about a society where crime was nearly impossible because everyone felt everyone else's pain. It sounds beautiful, Day said, but also lonely in its own way. Never being just yourself. I never thought of it as lonely. Not until now. The nights continued like this. Lixis would return to his cell after her shifts. They would talk for hours. She learned about human literature, music, philosophy. He learned about Valmari culture, history, telepathy. They built an understanding between them. A bridge across species, but others noticed. Tehian pulled Day aside one day in the engineering bay. The older man's face was serious, concerned. You trust her? Tehian asked in a low voice. That Velmari officer? Yes. She's one of them, Day. One of the people who bombed our cities. Who put us in this prison. She's also one person making her own choices. Just like we are. This could be a trick. Intelligence gathering. They could be using her to identify resistance leaders. To find out who might cause trouble. Day looked at his friend. What kind of human would I be if I let hate make my decisions? If I assume the worst about everyone who isn't like me? The kind who survives. Survival isn't enough. Not for me. I want to live. Really live. That means taking risks. It means giving people chances. Even people who are supposed to be my enemies. Tehian shook his head, but there was a sad smile on his face. You're too good for this place. For this war. Maybe that's why you're still sane, and the rest of us are barely holding on. That night, Lixis returned with something hidden under her uniform. She pulled out a data pad and handed it to Day. I accessed restricted files, she said, about the war, about how it started. Day took the pad and read. His eyes moved across the screen, and his expression changed, hardened. They struck first, he said quietly. Valmari, you attacked our colony on Persis Prime without warning, killed everyone there, then claimed we were the aggressors. I know. Everything we were taught was a lie. The Empire said humans fired first. said you were expanding violently, sighed we had to defend ourselves. But the real records show the truth. We wanted your systems, your resources, so we took them. Day handed back the pad. His hands were shaking slightly. Anger. After 3 years of control, of discipline, of choosing grace over bitterness, this truth shook him. Lixis reached out, hesitated, then placed her hand on his. Physical contact. Another rule broken. I'm sorry, she said. For what my people did? For what I believed without questioning. They looked at their hands. Velmari and human. Enemy and prisoner. But also something else now. Something that didn't have a name yet. You're here now, he said. Making a different choice. That matters. Outside the cell, footsteps echoed in the corridor. They pulled apart. Lixis stood quickly. I have to go. But I'll come back. She left, and they sat alone in the darkness. Everything had changed. The truth was out. And somehow, he knew that truth would demand a price. The announcement came during morning work shift. All prisoners were ordered to assemble in the main bay. They stood with the others, surrounded by 200 humans who had survived 3 years in this prison. They waited while Velmari guards lined the walls, weapons ready. Commander Vex emerged from his office, walking across the raised platform that overlooked the bay. His voice echoed through the speakers. This station is operating beyond capacity. Resources are limited. The Empire has decided that prisoner populations must be reduced. Half of you will be terminated in 3 days. The selection will be based on work efficiency and behavior records. That is all. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Then, like a wave breaking, sound erupted. Shouting, crying, anger, fear. The emotions Day had kept controlled for 3 years, suddenly pressed against him from every direction. Tae Hyan grabbed his arm. They're going to kill half of us. Execute us like we're nothing. Around them, prisoners were breaking down. Some fell to their knees. Others screamed at the guards. The Velmari watched with their weapons raised, ready to fire if the situation turned violent. Day felt his sanctuary shake, felt the walls of his mental palace crack. Half of them. 100 people. Dead in 3 days. The anger he had carefully folded away began to unfold, but then he breathed, slowly, deliberately. He had made choices for 3 years. He wouldn't stop now. We need to stay calm, he said to Tae Hyan. Panic helps no one. Calm? They're going to execute us. I know. But breaking down now doesn't change that. We need to think. The guards restored order by firing warning shots into the ceiling. The prisoners quieted, but the fear remained. Day could see it on every face. Death wasn't abstract anymore. It was 3 days away. That night, Lixis came to his cell earlier than usual. She moved quickly, urgently. Her face was tight with emotion. I just found out, she said as soon as the door closed. The execution order. I tried to protest. Tried to convince Vex to find another solution. But he wouldn't listen. The order came from high command. It's going to happen. Day sat on his bunk, hands folded. I know. You're not angry? Not afraid? I'm both. But I'm also thinking. Fear and anger cloud judgment. I need clarity right now. Lixis paced in the small cell. There has to be something we can do. Some way to stop this. There is, Day said quietly. We can escape. She stopped pacing. Stared at him. Escape? That's impossible. The station has sensors, guards, security systems. Even if you got out of the cells, you'd never reach the docking bay. And even if you did, you'd never get past the fleet patrols. It's impossible alone. But not with help. Not with someone who has security clearance. Someone who knows the systems. Someone the guards trust. Lixus understood. You want me to help you escape. I want you to choose. Just like you've been choosing by coming here every night. Just like you chose when you showed me the truth about the war. This is one more choice. Maybe the biggest one. But it's yours to make. She sat down on the edge of the bunk. If I do this, I'm betraying everything. My people. My duty. My entire life. Yes, they'll call me a traitor. Hunt me. Maybe kill me. Yes. But if I don't, 100 humans die in 3 days. People who have done nothing wrong except lose a war. Yes. Lixus put her head in her hands. Day watched her struggle with the decision. This was different from their quiet talks. Different from sharing information. This was action. Real, dangerous, irreversible action. Finally, she looked up. Tell me your plan. They spent the next hour going through details. Lixus knew the station's security system. She knew patrol schedules. She knew which guards could be distracted and which ones were too alert. She knew where the transport ships docked and how they were secured. The plan was dangerous. It had a dozen points where everything could go wrong. But it was possible. Barely, but possible. I need to talk to the others, Day said. Convince them to trust you. That won't be easy. Especially for someone like Tae Hyan. The next day, Day gathered a small group during lunch break. Tae Hyan and 6 others. Prisoners he had worked with. People he had helped. People who trusted him. He told them the plan. Told them about Lixus. Told them they had one chance to escape before the executions began. Tae Hyan's reaction was immediate. Trust a Valmari? You're insane. This is obviously a trap. She's setting us up. It's not a trap, Bae said firmly. I know her. She's risking everything to help us. You know her? You've talked to her a few times in the dark. That doesn't mean you know her. She's one of them, Bae. One of the people who destroyed our world. She's one person making a choice. Isn't that what we are? Every day we choose to stay human. To help each other. To not become monsters. She's choosing too. We should honor that. A younger prisoner named Min Su spoke up. But if it is a trap, we all die. Every one of us. If we do nothing, half of us die anyway, Bae said. At least this way we have a chance. At least this way we're choosing our fate instead of waiting for them to choose it for us. Tae Hyan looked at the others. Then back at Day. Fine, but if this is a trap, I'm taking her down with me. Fair enough. Over the next 2 days, they prepared. Lixus passed them information through dead drops. Guard schedules. Security codes. Patrol routes. She was risking everything with each piece of information she provided. The night before the execution was supposed to begin, the plan went into action. Lixus disabled the telepathic sensors that would detect emotional spikes. She overrode the cell locks for their section. She created a maintenance alert that pulled guards away from the corridor. Day and the others moved quickly through the empty passages. They wore maintenance uniforms Lixus had stolen. They carried tools that could double as weapons. They moved like shadows through the station, but then alarms started blaring. Red lights flashed. They heard running footsteps. Shouts in the Valmari language. We're compromised, Tae Hyan hissed. Move faster. They ran. The cargo bay was 3 corridors away. They could hear guards behind them. Weapons charging. Orders being shouted. Min Su fell, hit by an energy blast. He cried out, and Day grabbed him, pulling him forward. They couldn't stop. Couldn't leave anyone behind. They had all chosen this together. They burst into the cargo bay. A transport ship sat waiting, its loading ramped down. Lixis stood at the controls, working frantically. "Get in," she shouted. "I'm overriding the launch sequence." The prisoners ran up the ramp. They helped Min Su, who was injured but alive. Tae Hyen provided cover, using a stolen weapon to fire at the guards entering the bay. But then Commander Thex appeared, blocking Lixis from the ship. He had his weapon pointed at her. "Scout Officer Lixis, step away from the controls." "That's an order." Lixis stood frozen, caught between the ship and her commander, between the life she knew and the choice she had made. "You don't understand," she said. "They're executing innocent people. It's wrong. They're prisoners of war. The Empire has deemed them expendable. Your personal feelings are irrelevant. Personal feelings are all that matter. That's what I've learned. That's what makes us people instead of machines following orders." Dex's expression hardened. "You've been contaminated by the humans. I should have stopped this when I first noticed your interest. Last chance, Scout Officer. Stand down." Lixis looked back at the ship, at Day, who stood in the doorway, at the humans who had trusted her, at the choice she had made. She turned back to Vex. No. She hit the launch sequence. The ship's engines roared to life. But Vex was faster. His weapon fired. The energy blast hit Lixis in the chest, throwing her backward. "No!" Day screamed. He ran down the ramp toward her, but Tae Hyen grabbed him, pulling him back. The ship was lifting off. The cargo bay doors were opening. They had seconds before guards flooded the area. "We have to go," Tae Hyen shouted. They watched Lixis fall to the ground, watched Vex advance toward her. The ship lifted higher. The ramp began to close. Lixis turned her head, finding Day's eyes across the distance. She smiled, a small, peaceful smile. Then she raised her hand and pressed something on her wrist. The cargo bay's emergency bulkhead slammed shut, cutting off the guards, buying them time. The ramp sealed. The ship punched through the station's docking bay and into open space. Alarms chased them. Warning lights flashed. But they were away. They were free. Day sank to the floor of the ship, surrounded by the prisoners who had escaped. They had made it. They were alive, but Lixis wasn't with them. She had chosen to stay, chosen to buy them time, chosen to sacrifice herself for humans she barely knew. Tae Hyen knelt beside him. "She saved us. That Velmari saved us." Day nodded, unable to speak. In his mind, his sanctuary was crumbling. But he would rebuild it. He would add one more memory to his palace. The memory of someone who chose courage, who chose sacrifice, who chose to see humans as worth saving. He would carry that memory, and it would hurt. But it would also matter. The transport ship limped through space for 3 days before reaching Refuge Station. It was a neutral zone, controlled by neither Velmari nor human forces. A place where refugees, smugglers, and survivors gathered. The perfect place to disappear. Day stood at the viewport watching the station grow larger. Behind him, the other escaped prisoners talked quietly, planning, hoping, trying to understand what freedom meant after 3 years of captivity. Min. Su's wound had been treated with the ship's basic medical supplies. He would live. They all would live. Because one Velmari officer had chosen to give them that chance. Tae Hyen approached and stood beside Day. "You okay?" "No, but I will be. We made it. Against all odds. We're free. We're alive," Day corrected. "Freedom is something we'll have to figure out." The ship docked. Station authorities processed them as refugees. The neutral zone had rules. No military action. No revenge. No bringing the war into their space. Everyone agreed. They just wanted to rest. They were given quarters in the refugee section. Small rooms, but better than prison cells. Day sat on his bunk and closed his eyes. For the first time in 3 years, he tried to enter his sanctuary. But the palace he had built so carefully felt different now. There was a new section, a new room, and in it, a memory of Lixis. Her smile as the ship lifted away, her hand pressing the emergency button, her choice to stay behind. He examined the memory carefully, like all the others. The pain was sharp, fresh, but he folded it carefully into his mental palace. She had existed. She had mattered. She had changed everything. Over the next weeks, Day and the others adjusted to life on Refuge Station. They found work. Small jobs, maintenance, engineering, cooking, whatever paid enough to survive, but Day couldn't settle. He found himself spending hours in the station's information center, accessing news feeds, looking for any mention of the prison station, of the execution order, of a Velmari scout officer who had betrayed her people. Most news was propaganda. Both sides claimed victories. Both sides painted the other as monsters. But then, one day, they found something. A small article buried in a Velmari military report. Scout Officer Lixis, charged with treason. Found guilty of aiding enemy prisoners. Sentenced to exile instead of execution due to unusual telepathic. Broadcast during trial. Day read the line again. Exile, not execution. She was alive. He dug deeper, accessing databases through the station's network. Exile meant she had been stripped of rank and sent away from Velmari space. But where? The records were sealed. Military secret, but the article mentioned something else. During her trial, when the Velmari collective consciousness connected to judge her, something unusual happened. Her conviction had been so strong, so clear, that it resonated through their telepathic network. Enough Velmari felt her certainty to create doubt. Not about her guilt, but about whether she was wrong. It was unprecedented. One Velmari's choice affecting the collective consciousness, making them question, making them feel. Day sat back in his chair, processing this. Lixis hadn't just saved them. She had planted a seed in the Velmari collective mind, a seed of doubt about the war, about how they treated prisoners, about humans. One choice, one sacrifice, rippling outward. 3 months after the escape, Day received a message. Anonymous, untraceable, 3 words in broken human language. I chose well. His hands shook as he read it. She was alive. She was out there somewhere, and she wanted him to know. He sat down and recorded a response, hoping somehow it would reach her. You asked me once why I built that sanctuary in my mind, why I chose to remember beauty instead of drowning in pain. I told you it was because that's what makes us human. But I was wrong. It's not what makes us human. It's what makes us people. All people, Velmari, human. Anyone who chooses to carry their pain with grace. Anyone who chooses to see others as worth saving. You prove that. You're not just Velmari, or just different from us. You're people. Like us. Thank you for seeing us that way. Thank you for choosing. He sent the message into the network, encrypted, bouncing through a dozen relay stations. He didn't know if she would receive it, but it mattered that he tried. 6 months after the escape, things began to change. The escaped prisoners had made contact with human resistance groups. Word of their escape spread. More importantly, the story of a Velmari officer who had helped them spread Dot became a symbol. Proof that the enemy wasn't a monolith. Proof that individuals could choose differently. Proof that the war might end someday, not with victory or defeat, but with understanding. A joined the resistance. Not as a soldier. He refused to fight, but as an engineer. He helped build communication networks. He helped coordinate refugee movements. He helped create systems that would support peace when the time came. Tae-Hyan joined the military side. He became a soldier again, fighting for human freedom. But even he was different now. He trained his units to distinguish between enemy soldiers and enemy people, to remember that every Velmari was an individual making choices. "You changed me," Tae-Hyan admitted one day, "watching you with that officer, seeing you choose to trust when trust was dangerous. It made me realize I could choose too. Choose how I fight. Choose who I want to be." The war continued. Battles were won and lost. People died. Stations were captured and recaptured. But something had shifted. More stories emerged of Velmari questioning orders, of soldiers refusing to execute prisoners, of officers requesting transfers rather than participate in certain operations. The telepathic, collective consciousness was changing, slowly, one choice at a time. 1 year after the escape, Day received another message. This one was longer. A coded transmission that took hours to decrypt. It was from Lixus. She was on a distant moon at the edge of neutral space, living in exile. But she wasn't alone. Other Velmari had joined her. Officers and soldiers who had questioned the war, who had felt her conviction through the telepathic network and made their own choices. They were building something. A community. A place where Velmari and humans could live together, learn from each other, prove that coexistence was possible. She asked if he would come, if he would help build this new place. Day read the message 3 times. Then he packed his few belongings and booked passage on a transport heading toward the edge of space. Tae-Hyan tried to convince him to stay. The resistance needs you, your skills, your perspective. The resistance needs soldiers and engineers. But peace needs something else. It needs people willing to build bridges. That's what I can do. What if it's a trap? What if the Velmari are using her to capture resistance members? Then I'll be captured. But I don't think that's what this is. I think this is one person trying to create something better. And I choose to be part of that. Tae-Hyan shook his head, but he was smiling. You're still too good for this war. Go, build your bridge. And if it works, send word. Some of us might want to cross it someday. The journey took 2 weeks. They traveled on 3 different ships, passing through neutral zones and gray spaces where neither side had control. Finally, he reached the coordinates Lixus had sent. The moon was small, barely habitable, but there were structures on the surface, prefabricated buildings, gardens growing under protective domes, and people, Velmari and humans, working together. The ship landed, and Day walked down the ramp. He saw her immediately. Lixus stood near the landing pad, waiting. She looked different. No uniform, no rank insignia, just simple clothes. But her eyes were the same. She walked forward to meet him. They stopped a few feet apart, uncertain. So much had happened. So much had changed. You came, she said. I wasn't sure you would. After everything, after I stayed behind. You stayed behind so we could escape. You chose to sacrifice yourself. That's not something I could forget. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Lixus said, Do you want to see what we're building? Yes. She led him through the small settlement, showed him the gardens where humans and Velmari worked side by side, showed him the communications hub where they broadcast messages of peace to both sides, showed him the school where children of both species learned together. We're teaching them that the war doesn't have to define them, Lixus explained, that they can choose different futures, choose understanding instead of hate. It's beautiful, they said. It's what I saw in my mind. A sanctuary, but real. That night, they sat together outside one of the buildings, looking up at the stars. Two people from different worlds, brought together by war, but choosing peace. I need to tell you something, Lixus said. When I walked into your room that first night, I was curious. I wanted to see what a human mind felt like. I expected chaos, primitiveness, everything we were taught. I know, but what I saw froze me. I saw beauty, order, choice. I saw someone carrying terrible pain and choosing to build something good with it. It challenged everything I believed. And in that moment, I realized the war was wrong. Not just strategically wrong, morally wrong. Because if humans could be that strong, that beautiful, then we had no right to treat them as less. They listened, saying nothing. That's what I saw, Lixus continued. When I walked into your room, I saw a person, not a prisoner, not an enemy, a person making choices that I didn't think were possible. And it changed me forever. Day reached out and took her hand. You changed me too. You showed me that individuals can choose differently from their groups. That one person's courage can ripple outward and create change. You gave me hope that this war might end someday, not with victory, but with understanding. They sat together under alien stars, holding hands. Two people who had chosen each other across the divide of war. Who had chosen to build instead of destroy. Who had chosen to see each other as human, in the deepest sense of that word. The war would continue for years. People would die. Battles would rage. But on this small moon, something else was growing. A seed of peace. A community of individuals who had chosen differently. And it had started with one Velmari officer walking into a prison cell and seeing something that changed everything. Not an enemy, not a primitive, but a person building beauty from pain, choosing grace over bitterness, carrying memories like treasures. She had walked into his room at night, and the alien girl had frozen at what she saw, not because it was terrible, but because it was impossibly, beautifully human. And in seeing that humanity, she had discovered her own.